night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
As promised is our good friend Scotty Roberts, and we're going to talk about, I don't know, we're going to weave through this. Scotty, we've been dealing with very, very unusual times. I don't know if it's worldwide, but it certainly is here. And I know the pandemic, the coronavirus, is definitely a worldwide phenomenon. But the rest of the stuff, I'm not sure if it's isolated to the United States or everything is just out of whack. What do you think? Is everything out of whack?
Yeah, by the way, good to be here. Thanks. I got to tell you, this stuff is, the world's out of whack. I'm not an astrologer, but I've talked to a couple of them that are very good with the numbers and the planets and all of that. It's kind of a mathematical way of looking at things. And I couldn't cite for you what planet is in whose house or, what constellation is glowing brighter or anything like that. But I can tell you from the things I've heard from people in the know about this is they say that the way planets are aligned right now and when the coronavirus started, it matches up to lots of other periods in history that had great upheaval and great catastrophe. And I found that fascinating all by itself. Yeah. And so, supposedly we're in the middle of, somebody cited just today, somebody I know very well that works with this stuff, and they were saying, this planet's in this house, and that's when this happened in history.
Yeah.
The Black Death. This is in this house, and that's when this catastrophe happened. And this is in this house, and that's when this other catastrophe in history. We've got all three of them right now going on.
Wow.
And so if there's something to that, then, maybe that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. I said, what's next week? Yellowstone erupts?
Oh, I know.
That would...
It seems like we have to be prepared.
That would solve a lot of problems. It would take out 2/3 of the country. So.
Yeah, it would solve something. We had a guest on, and boy, I was just racking my brain trying to remember who it was, and sadly, I can't. That's part of getting to this age. But we were talking about it was the coming of a prophet or a teacher. It may have been the coming of Maitreya, and they were talking about the fact that we are entering the age of Aquarius, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And that these ages change every 3,600 years or something like that. And,
something like that, yeah.
And Jesus was here during the last age, or the age that we're leaving. And now, so that kind of lines up with what you were just saying. There's something astrological going on here that might very well be responsible for all this craziness.
And it might be, all these... Maybe these guys were onto something when they were doing like the biblical prophecies of the end times and stuff. All these prophecies. And there's things going on that kind of look like sort of maybe some of the things you read about in biblical prophecy. And did they have their eyes on the numbers and they're saying, this is coming? Well, if they did, maybe they'd have had dates or something like that. Nobody gave any dates. But there's a lot of things happening that seem to line up with what we used to learn way back when I was in very fundamental Christian conservative education. And, that the end times would have this, and this earmarking it. And you're starting to see things that look like that, down to even things that are being touted as good things, like Elon Musk talking about the neurotech, now the AI tech that they're trying to do, which is where... In essence, your mind never dies. It's the stuff of science fiction. You upload it into a computer, the way I understand it, and you can. It's stuff that people can access as well, and it's so wild when you think about it. It sounds like the stuff where in the biblical prophecies, and when the beast rises in the Antichrist, and people will not be able to buy or sell without the mark of the beast in their wrist or their forehead. Things like that. And you go, what the hell are they talking about? And then you hear all this stuff about implants and stuff like that. You'd be scanned for your implant in the wrist or the forehead, maybe. And you think of these people who develop this. Do they not read this stuff, and say, maybe we ought to make it in the leg or something instead of the wrist or the forehead, so Nobody thinks it's 666, the mark of the beast or something. I make a little fun of that, but you start to see all this stuff start happening that looks like blank. And so you ask the questions. Does it have anything to do with that? And I really don't know, to tell you the truth, because it can go far afield from all of that prophecy stuff as well. So, those are the things that enter my mind when I see this. When you hear about coronavirus when it first came out, it makes you think of the biblical prophecy that said in the end times, at the same time, 1/3 of the Earth's population would be killed, would die. You see the things about, hearing it's not even prophecy, it's scientific prophecy, if you will, about Yellowstone, which I mentioned. And of course, we were looking at this stuff 10 years ago, right. 15 years ago, right. But they've been watching the Earth buckling, up to 10 inches every day and back down. If that chimera goes beneath Yellowstone, what happens? They said the last time that chimera blew, it took out 2/3 of what is now the United States and threw the Earth into nuclear winter for about 20 or 30 years. And so is that going to happen? What happens if that blows?
Yeah.
And you think about that, and I don't want to be disaster-ridden, having anybody, run out and, that's it, the Earth is ending, end life today, or anything like that. But you have to start asking if there's anything to the old prophecies, or are we just living out life the way it happens? This is how it happens. How many untold planets out there have gone through something like this?
Yeah, and we don't have an answer for forces of that magnitude. There is no defense against that kind of natural force, which we know happens throughout the course of Earth's history. It happens often. But our perspective of time is warped because we look at things in terms of a lifespan, or maybe a couple of generations, or even all of human history, which is really just a blip of time when it comes to geological time. So, it's going to happen someday. Will humankind be here to experience that eruption? Who knows? Maybe something else will have wiped out humanity before that, or that might do the trick.
There are scientists that have said. There was a Chinese scientist, and I read this in National Geographic magazine like 10 years ago, and he was asked point blank, well, when do you think the volcano is going to go under Yellowstone? He says, could be 10 minutes from now, could be 10,000 years from now. He says, we don't know.
And that's a very small window of geological time. It's tiny.
Yes, it's a tiny. Very small window.
Let me ask you, you brought up the mark of the beast and all of this, and given what we're looking at in today's climate, I don't mean that in a weather sense. I mean that in a society sense. Could the mark of the beast? I've heard a lot of different interpretations of it. Could it actually be a political ideology? If you don't have the right political ideology, you don't have the mark of the beast.
I think you might be through the.
We're losing you a little bit there, Scotty. I don't know. Are you with us still?
It was written 2,000 years ago. And
can you back, Scotty? Can you back up for me, because we lost you in the beginning of your answer there?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's prophetic language, and that's the way it's written. And so you don't know: do I take this literally? Do I take it figuratively? Is it speaking about plague? Is it speaking about science? What's it speaking to? Is it politics? And, of course, biblical prophecy is all wrapped around politics. Somebody is going to be recognized as the leader of the world. And so I asked the question once. I said, he will be actually the leader of every country, or he will be looked to as a leader in the world, the foremost voice on earth. Is that what that means? Is it going to be somebody like that? But it also ties a lot of Israel to the prophecies. This at the same time, you're going to see the temple rebuilt in Jerusalem. But the temple site is where? It's where the Dome of the Rock stands right now. Imagine what would happen if they tore down the Dome of the Rock and built the temple in Jerusalem.
Right.
So things like that. You look at that, and you look at the politics, you look at the countries, you look at the names involved, you look at how the prophecy was written. But, of course, the biblical prophecy isn't the only prophecies out there of end times. we did see how 2012 happened. Oh, I guess that was kind of a poof in the dark. Nothing happened. And I saw a political cartoon, like a political cartoon, like The Far Side, and it showed a couple of Aztec guys, and they're standing by the big calendar, the big circular calendar, and he goes, "Oh, you ran out of space, eh, Bob?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I bet about 1,000 years from now, people are going to go nuts." And so, prophecy and all of that. I don't know that we can gauge current events prophecy, other than maybe to say there might be something to that, and maybe it does take a different form than we've always taken. Politics today in this country right now, we're watching this happen. And there's something I've been talking a lot about lately that ties into this, and this is the narrative. You hear people say that a lot. You hear it in the news. You hear it with pundits.
Yeah.
They talk about, well, this is happening, but that's going according to their narrative, or people are being duped because they're listening to the narrative, and don't listen to the narrative. Well, the thing is, everybody's got a narrative. It doesn't matter what side of the issue you might fall on politically or ideologically or religiously. Everybody's got a narrative. That's the story that bolsters whatever course they're following. Now, you could have in this country right now, if you divided it into two, you could say there's a conservative narrative and there's a liberal narrative, roughly. And so you would look at that and you say, the problem I'm seeing is that the narrative we are locked into right now in this country especially, and perhaps in the world, is the war narrative. The war narrative is the one where they're all a bad guy to fight against, no matter what side you're on. Your narrative is the correct one, and you have to fight against the other guy who is automatically the enemy because his narrative is one that you believe is destructive from your point of view of your narrative. And so I started talking about this and asking the question, maybe we need to look, and don't think I'm a peacenik or anything like that, where I'm a weirdo about this stuff, but I said, what about the peace narrative? There is a narrative that is the peace narrative that says we need to, in a sense, transcend above the narratives that are going on, and rather than look at everybody as enemies and say, how do I best combat fighting the war narrative? And I started, when I talked about this, I really started out by saying, how do you fight the narrative? And then the more I researched and more I studied, I found the narrative has to be one of peace. It has to be one of saying, look, we all have different narratives. Yeah, I get that. But everybody needs to stop and look at the source points of everybody else's narratives and try to understand where those people are coming from. Now, that might sound just as easy as, talking peace and talking unity and all of that. And I think it goes a little deeper than that. It looks to say, you have to look to say, there has to be a narrative of peace and understanding and unity before there's going to be peace and understanding and unity. Now, I can look at people like Antifa. I can look at the negative side, the opposite narrative that I hold politically or ideologically, and I can say, they're the enemies, they're the bad guys, they're the ones who need to be eradicated. At the same time, do I need to stop and ask, okay, what's their narrative? What's their story? What's at the base? What is the source point of what they believe? And if you can get to that and try to gain an understanding of what some of these people believe, maybe there's a way of finding solutions and unity. But at the same time, sometimes the war narrative is absolutely necessary. There are things that we have to fight every day. I'll use a silly example, but a real example. If some mugger tried to attack my wife and my children, you know what? I would click into a war narrative very quickly, and I would move to do my best to defend my family and possibly to hurt the person that's trying to hurt my family. So there are times when a war narrative is necessary, or violence is necessary, anger is necessary. But I'm trying, even in all the discussions that go on social media nowadays, and because I do radio, I put a lot of politics out there, and I sometimes poke the bear. I sometimes stir the pot for the sake of finding what people are thinking. And by poking the bear, I mean I just put up a topic. It's going to be, I know it'll be a hot topic. And I get all kinds of answers. But I get people calling me all kinds of things. I've been called everything from a Nazi to a Zionist pig. I don't know how you could be a Nazi and a Zionist pig at the same time.
Yeah.
To a xenophobe, a misogynist. I'm a homophobe. I hate LGBTQ people. I hate Antifa. Well, if you're not Antifa, then you are obviously a fascist.
Oh my.
And I say, no, I'm not a fascist just because I don't approve of Antifa or agree with their message. And so trying to maintain a peace narrative for me is one of where I check myself very quickly, and I don't fall into the name calling. I don't fall into, if somebody has a stupid idea, I don't go, you stupid son of a bitch. That's not how I start my argument. That's a good way to lose the attention of the people that you're arguing with.
Right.
So I try to look for the common ground, but at the same time, do you think that maybe this is the case, I will ask? Or I try to approach things. Everybody says, and you're so negative, you hurt so many people's feelings, you do. And well, said, no, I really don't. Then you aren't listening to what I say when I say it. If you think I'm out there to hurt people, I'm not. So all of this, just take everything I've just said and just push it aside and put that in a little kettle and say, I think what's going on in the world today are things that we can combat. I am not down in the dumps usually about this stuff. It doesn't bother me other than I get pissed off by it all. But I find that I can find my own calm in it because I know how to approach things from a peaceful perspective and look for that and seek that. However, when I look at things like Minneapolis, now I think you know, and maybe some of your listeners know, I live very close to Minneapolis. I grew up in Minneapolis as a kid in North Minneapolis. I grew up just a few blocks from where a lot of these things are taking place in Minneapolis. I had my own company back before I met you. It was called the Uptown Marketing Group. And I was at the corner of Hennepin and Lake Street. Lake Street is the district that got set on fire last week. Lake Street, you go 2 blocks from where my office was, and you can go see all the burned out shells of some of these buildings. And so I was right on the corner of that district, and they were really trying to build that district up, and it was a very swanky, combined with hippie kind of style of the town. And it was right off the Lake District, the inner city Lake Districts. And you look at that now, and I say, right where I was officed, there's 170 businesses that have been shut down by rioters.
Wow.
Some of them burned, some of them looted, and these are all people that are local to that neighborhood. Most of it started at ground zero was the Lindale Avenue and Lake Street. I was a couple of blocks up on Hennepin Avenue and Lake Street. Shut down.
It's crazy.
And I say, you cannot commit an injustice to create a justice. And that's the big problem today. And so I think a lot of this started as riots, but it's moved into something very different now, where it's spread around the world and so on. The problem I find is that there is at the core of it all is a lie. And I'm going to state one thing, and this is we need to get, so I'm not going to try to be as political as I sound, but you know how the COVID-19, the coronavirus, and everything's been shut down.
Right.
And in Minneapolis and Minnesota, the governor of Minnesota made it mandatory lockdowns, and you couldn't go out, you couldn't go to restaurants, as everybody knows. You couldn't go to funerals. I knew people who died, not necessarily of COVID, but who just died naturally.
Sure.
And they couldn't attend the funerals because there was lockdown. Then all of us, and the governor declared this, Governor Walz of Minnesota. Now, that was just a few weeks ago.
That's right.
Now we've got this guy who's killed by a cop. And all of a sudden, the governor shows up to his funeral with thousands of people. And the question I asked myself, now if this is too political, you can slap me down on that, but but I said, now I asked this question. I said, Black Lives Matters. I said, they say that Black Lives matter to them. Now, if you, Jim, were part of a movement that cared about, you say, I care about this blank sect of our society. I care about them. Now, Black and African Americans are in the high-risk category for coronavirus. And just by race alone, they are in the high-risk category. And yet you've got Black Lives Matter who say they care about Black lives, telling everybody not to go home. Go home. Don't gather together in thousands. You're going to get sick and die, which was the narrative 2 weeks ago until this started. Now, all of a sudden, the coronavirus, it's okay to go out in numbers, and the people who say they care about a high-risk category of our society are pushing that high-risk category society to go out into it. Now, I have my views on COVID-19 and coronavirus and shutdowns and all of that. But I say, what's the narrative behind that when you say that the group that cares about a group tells them to do the opposite of the thing that is supposed to save their lives by general order in the United States right now, it seems? That tells me that there is political agenda in the narrative. And so their narrative is one of war, not of peace. And so these are and that's all I'm going to say about that stuff tonight, unless you have things you want to say about what I've said, but because I don't want to get too political. My politics will scream through and I'll become an angry young man.
Right. Well, we want to avoid going too far in the political avenue here. But I will say that it is very, very curious. And I'm not even talking about the movement themselves. I'm talking about the way the media handled so much of this when they were screaming at us and arresting people for taking walks on the beach and, showing up at people's businesses who decided to open, and they did so in a very safe and careful manner, yet they were arresting them because they dared to try to feed their families.
Exactly.
I look at that, and then I look a week later, they don't say a word about thousands of people gathering, and I won't even comment on what they were doing, but just the fact there were people together like that. They don't say a word about that. And now that that's kind of subsided in many places, now they're back to talking about how states like Georgia reopened too early. Or it's just the media is such an embarrassment anymore. It's unbelievable. Whatever happened to the honest reporters who just wanted to report the news? That doesn't exist anymore. Well, I'm only going to keep you for a few more minutes. I want to go back to this idea of end times and stuff that's going on that starts to, if you start to piece it together, you might have the case for evidence that we're actually entering these end times. I'm curious about the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Does that show up in the Bible anywhere?
Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Not that I can make a direct correlation to. Maybe I'd have to sit down and stare at it for a few minutes and go, oh, yeah, maybe here. But not that I know off the top of my head.
You know what I'm talking about, right? You know what I'm talking about when I say the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Yes? No?
I have an idea of what you're talking about just by name alone.
Okay, you might not then, and maybe it's very recent news, but there's a section of Seattle that has been basically declared its independence from the United States.
Right.
And they are known as the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ.
Yes, CHAZ.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that is the people who've declared it an independent state aren't the people who work and live there.
Right.
They're from outside.
That's right. I can't imagine.
We're going to take over your property and declare it our independent territory.
I can't imagine being one of the business owners or even a residence. I don't know if there's any residences in that 6-block area, but I mean, what the heck? You expect your government that you pay taxes to come in and stop something like this so you can live
step in
it's just
and
crazy.
help you.
And I was being a bit facetious, but but my point is more that these are things that I don't think we ever thought we'd be seeing in our lifetimes anyway. It's just,
I see them all as things that I think will eventually be remedied. I don't think we're going to fall off into, it's like I saw the president today in an article I saw that hit the news today, this afternoon, where he said something about, no, America is not racist and we will not defund the police. And so this is the reaction you're getting. Now, is this creating more of a race war and more of this? Maybe. But I think what's eventually going to happen, it's going to get resolved. I'm a huge optimist, and I'm a realist at the same time, where I think these things are not uncommon. And by the way, whenever you hear anybody want to compare what's going on now to the Boston Tea Party, just refer them to American history.
Oh, that drives me nuts.
And, that drives me nuts, too. I did a whole show on that, just talking about how the Boston Tea Party was all about taxation without representation.
That's right.
And when those guys who dressed up as Native Americans and threw the tea in the harbor, they were protesting against the taxation that Great Britain was putting on the colonists. They did not leave the boat and go and burn down the businesses of all their friends and neighbors.
And it was specifically taxation on the tea.
Mm-hmm.
It was that was the specific tax that was the final straw that made them act.
That's right. And that has nothing to do congruently, comparatively, with anything that's going on today.
Nothing close.
Now with these current events. And so I think this stuff will resolve itself. I mean, we saw acts like this when, back in the 3rd century, the Library of Alexandria was raided by Roman soldiers and driven and spurred on by the Bishop of Alexandria, Cyril, the Bishop of Alexandria. And they burned down this repository of amazing knowledge because it contained pagan literature. And they killed Hypatia of Alexandria, one of the foremost teachers there, by pulling her off her chariot and flaying her alive in the streets.
Wow.
Mobs of Christians did this. And I'm not speaking against Christianity, just who did it at the time. And now Cyril of Alexandria, who spurred a lot of this on, he became a saint in the church. He's Saint Cyril of Alexandria, and for the deeds that he did and the things he did there. And so you look at that and you say, I'll bet those people at that time thought, this is the end of the world. And as a matter of fact, if you ever were to watch the movie Agora, Agora, which is the Greek word for the open places, the marketplaces, and things like that, the marketplaces of ideas, there is a scene where they're showing the raiding of the Library of Alexandria and all the fires and people fighting and dying and killing. I mean, it was terrible. It was like downtown Minneapolis. And the camera slowly pans out to an aerial view. And then, with graphics, they show the aerial view. You're ascending through the clouds, and the clouds cover it all. And then it finally ascends all the way out, and you see the planet. And it's quiet and silent. And it backs out, and you just see the globe. And then it comes back in a little later. It was trying to tell that picture of what, like, Carl Sagan said look up, all your listeners, go look up on YouTube, The Blue Dot. It's about a 3 to 5 minute video by Carl Sagan where he's narrating something. And he talks about, on this planet, this is us, the blue dot hanging in space. And he says, we have no idea if anybody is even out there anywhere else at this point in our history. He says, but this blue dot has contained every human being who has ever lived and died. He says, from good people to bad people, religious people to secular people, politicians and tyrants and peace lovers and all of this. And he says, every one of those human beings from the beginning of human history has lived and died on this little blue speck hanging in space. And as far as we know, there is nobody else out there that's coming to our aid, at least at this point. And so he makes the point of saying, we're all human. We are all here. There is one race. There are not multiple races. There is one, and this is really kind of the beginnings of that whole peace narrative. It's understanding. When you hear a politician say, we're all in this together, I start to cringe when I hear that, because I usually hear it from one side of an argument. We're all in this together. BS.
Yeah.
B is in B, S is in S. But when you think about it from a global standpoint, a historical standpoint, we are. We're all here. This is where we live. This is it. This is the place. You destroy it, and you destroy yourself. You destroy our civilization, and you destroy yourself. This is where I see some of these people. I don't know what their intent is. You see their visceral, open intent, but you don't know what the deeper intent is. What is it you're trying to bring about? What kind of a country do you want to have? What kind of a world do you want to have? And it's like I've said many times. It's like you look at Iran, and I happen to know, or Egypt, where I've been many times. The local people love you to come and visit. Happy, friendly, wonderful people in these countries. Same in Iran. It's just the handful of few in the governments that prevent that and create the wars and create the distancing and create the disunity and the hatred. And they spur the common people on to believe that. But most common people would rather have, please come and visit, and we would love to come and visit you. They don't want it. They don't want war. They don't want this stuff. So these people that are perpetrating this stuff right now, I honestly think, Jimmy, that it's going to be eventually gone. It's going to be taken care of. And it's hopefully before it comes down to violence. Violence begets violence. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. And so if they push this and they are hurting people, there's going to be some comeuppance here pretty soon, and then it's going to be eradicated. And you know what? Life goes on. So,
so I'm not sure whether I should be comforted or scared to death based on what you just said. But I'll go down the middle. I'll go down the middle. Scotty, thanks for being here tonight. Where can people catch your show and the things you have going on?
You can find me on YouTube. It's just Mr. Scotty Roberts, Mr. all spelled out. That's where my show is. I've got about 200 episodes archived there right now, or on Odyssey Radio. And it's just the video simulcast I do on YouTube. You can go over to my website. It's just my full name, ScottAllenRoberts.com. Allen is A-L-A-N, ScottAllenRoberts.com. And you can see all the stuff I do, the books I write, the radio show, the art I do, all of that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here tonight. We always love having you on the program.
Jimmy, thanks for having me.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by J.V. Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Joha Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.